She was my university girlfriend. Then I saw her panic when my dad walked in. What I found out after left me betrayed, confused, and rebuilding my life. I need to tell someone this because I don't know what else to do. I still can't believe I'm saying it out loud. My father and I, father and son, ended up with the same woman. She was my girlfriend. She was his girlfriend. I'm writing this because I don't know how to process the disgust, the confusion, and the hollow anger that keeps settling in my chest. Recap: I'm Carlos, 24, finishing university in another city. My mother died when I was very young. I barely remember her. My father, a fit 44-year-old who takes care of himself, has always been more distant than present. 3 years and a half ago I moved away for school. 8 months ago I met Andrea at a party. We fell in love quickly. She traveled home often, which happens to be the same town where I grew up. She had been secretive with her phone, and on one return she refused to see me. The first thing I should say is that my dad and I are not close. We are respectful, polite, even, but there's an emotional distance that has always stood between us. He provides what he can, expects his son to be independent, and carries himself with a kind of quiet composure. Growing up without my mom made him single for a long time. He dated younger women. It was awkward sometimes, but never this. I never imagined a scenario where our lives would cross like this. When Andrea and I started dating, it was the kind of thing that takes over your head and your days. We met at a university party and the chemistry was instant. The jokes, the way she listened, the things we wanted to do. She had a brightness that made the chaos of finishing a degree feel bearable. She traveled home often because of money and family responsibilities. I accepted that at first. Over time, the travel became normal. We had routines, frantic, stolen late-night calls, short weekends together, a feeling that when we were apart we were simply stocking energy for the next time we could be near each other. I told myself trust was part of loving someone and that I could be patient. At first there were just small oddities. She started putting her phone face down when we were together. She wouldn't leave it alone on tables. She wouldn't let me grab it to check a message the way couples sometimes do playfully. She kept it close as if it were a private thing she guarded. I thought maybe she was shy or worried about family watching data, or simply protective. Once, the night she came back from a trip, she said she had a headache and didn't want to see me. I felt weird about it, but we moved past it. I didn't want suspicion to erode what we had. I wanted to believe her. A few months later I decided to bring Andrea home properly. I felt ready to do that small adult thing, introduce her to my father. We flew, and the plan was simple: stop by Andrea's place first, then the next day I would bring her to my parents' town and surprise my dad with lunch. I wanted him to meet her in a calm setting, to see the person who had become important to me. I remember the morning of the lunch. Andrea looked radiant, with a smile that felt like sunlight. I was nervous in that uncomfortable way, proud, protective, hopeful. We arrived at the restaurant and sat at the reserved table. My father was running late. I remember the angle of the light through the window, the slight scent of lemon and coffee in the air, Andrea nervously turning a napkin between her fingers. She kept smiling, the kind of smile that swallows imperfections. Then my father walked in from the back of the restaurant and the world tilted. For a second nothing registered, then I saw Andrea's face change. Her smile melted away, color drained from her cheeks, and her eyes widened into a look I had never seen on her, pure, stunned fear. I turned to see what she was staring at and saw my father standing there. He smiled a huge smile of surprise and said, loud enough that people nearby could hear, "Wow, what a surprise. I never imagined seeing both of you here together." My stomach dropped because the way he said it, the tone he used, felt oddly intimate. Then, without the embarrassment that should have come first, he leaned in as if to greet her with a kiss on the mouth. Time slowed in that moment. The surrounding clink of cutlery and quiet conversations blurred into something thin and metallic. I remember the sound of my voice cutting through the room. "What are you doing? Are you crazy? What the hell?" People turned their heads. Andrea recoiled like someone seeing a ghost. My father froze, the motion caught between a smile and a question. He looked at me, and when he said, with a sort of baffled innocence, "How do you mean?" "She's my girlfriend. I felt a cold, clinical kind of shock like a splinter entering bone. Andrea couldn't speak. She was shaking. My father, for a moment as if unaware of the gravity, asked her what was wrong and looked genuinely puzzled. I shouted that she was my girlfriend, and the panic on his face shifted to a complicated mix: confusion, embarrassment, and then a kind of defensive anger I hadn't heard from him before. The juxtaposition of his composure and the ridiculous statement he made in that moment made everything surreal. When Andrea finally found her voice, it was small and broken. She said she had met my father at a cafe in our hometown during one of her trips. He'd talked to her, flirted, been charming, he'd asked her out. She admitted that they'd been seeing each other every time she went back home. She said the first night they'd been intimate was the very night she had used as an excuse when she didn't want to see me on her return. Listening to her, the parts I'd ignored, her secrecy, the weird phone behavior, that one night she didn't want to be with me, snapped together into a grotesque pattern. We left the restaurant under a cloud of stares. My father, oddly protective and bossy in the same breath, shepherded Andrea to his car. She said, "I can explain," and the words felt tinny against the roar of my pounding heart. He drove us home. On the way he was more composed than I felt. His voice had the firmness of a man trying to make sense out of a mess he'd helped create. When we got to the house, the conversation disintegrated into a cocktail of anger, pleading, and shame. Andrea's explanation was granular: loneliness, attention, being flattered by a man who listened to her in ways that felt adult and important. She said she felt seen and wanted, and somewhere loneliness turned into something else. My father, when he answered, sounded older and fragile and apologetic in fits. He didn't deny some of what she said. He admitted he'd been charmed, that he had sought company, that he had made terrible decisions. He tried to say that none of them had intended this as a deliberate wound between us, that it had become something we were all swept into. 2 hours later, Andrea left in an Uber, tired and hollow from being the center of a moral storm. My father and I remained in the house, two men caught on opposite sides of an absurd confession. He tried to speak calmly afterward, to say we were both victims in some way, that anger directed only at each other would be misplaced. He asked for time. He said he wanted us to be able to process and then talk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and shake answers out of him. I wanted to say things that would end everything in a single sentence. Instead, I retreated to my room and let icy silence grow between us. It's been 2 days. I haven't said a single word to him. The silence is dense and full of images. I replay the restaurant scene, the exact way Andrea turned when she saw my father, the look of absolute terror on her face, the way my father's smile changed as if he'd been expecting something else entirely. I replay Andrea's confession, her small, shameful sentences, the casual detail that the first time they slept together was the night she had refused me. A tide of revulsion washes through me, and each wave leaves me more drained. Sometimes my reactions surprise me. Part of me wants to cut contact clean, throw down the cards, choose myself, remove the pain. Another part of me is bizarrely concerned about my father's humanity, how old he is, the man who raised me imperfectly but who is still my father. The word victim, when he used it, sounded wrong at first, but there's a disturbing tangle of loneliness and selfishness and small choices that led here. None of that makes the betrayal less real. It only makes the moral landscape messy. My friends have opinions that land like rocks. Some tell me to go no contact. Others say to breathe and take the high road. The advice is noisy and contradictory. Inside, I don't have a map. I have impulses, slapback revenge, legal-sounding plans, therapy as a slightly calmer option. None of those feel like the right immediate move. Right now I feel suspended between wanting to destroy what hurt me and wanting to put back together something that's been snapped into too many pieces. There is grief underneath the fury. I keep thinking about my mother, the absence that shaped the three of us. Losing her when I was a child left a hole my father and I both dealt with in separate ways. Maybe that absence made him more vulnerable to attention. Maybe it made me too trusting of the idea of family. None of those speculations excuse what happened, and yet they occupy the corners of my thoughts like damp stains. I imagine the future with and without them. In the without version, I walk away and never look back. I pretend family means only what I choose it to mean. In the with version, I imagine difficult conversations, a slow rebuilding, a therapy couch, awkward dinners that eventually become bearable. There is a terrifying possibility that the person I share DNA with and the person I loved are both capable of terrible choices, and that the ordinary scaffolding that holds families together isn't as sturdy as I thought. At night, I wake with the restaurant taste in my mouth, lemon, hurried coffee, the metallic tang of embarrassment. The images come in fragments. I find myself thinking about the little betrayals over months I had ignored, the phone face down, the canceled meetings, the night she said she had a headache. Each one becomes a signpost that I chose to misread. I feel both stupid and deeply betrayed. The cognition of that is almost worse than the hurt, knowing I could have seen this and didn't want to. Part of me resents anyone who tells me forgiveness must be immediate or easy. I don't owe anyone speed. I don't owe my father moral clarity or immediate affection. I also don't owe complete exile to someone who, for a long time, was the man who fed me and tried to teach me how to be a decent person. The tension in that, between anger and familial instinct, makes me feel unmoored. For now, I'm using words to breathe. I don't have a public spectacle in mind. I don't want social media to decide the shape of this pain. I want to process in private with rules that protect me. But names are heavy, and silence is heavier. Writing this feels like a small way to steady myself, to name the betrayal, to place it where I can see it and not let it fester in rumor or in my head alone. I don't know if reconciliation is possible. I don't know whether I will forgive or what forgiveness would even look like. Maybe it looks like a slow, cautious dialogue where promises are validated by actions. Maybe it means setting firm boundaries and then slowly allowing a window for trust to be rebuilt. Maybe it means choosing to protect my own mental health no matter the familial price. Right now I don't have those answers. I'm sitting in the discomfort of the pause. I need time to figure out whether my anger is righteous or a mask for grief. I need to know whether my father can be someone I trust again, and I need to know who Andrea is when she's not lying to preserve what she wants. I don't have the answers. For now I have silence and the small, tremoring hope that writing this will let me breathe a little clearer. I need to know who Andrea is when she's not lying to keep what she says. I'm hoping that writing this will let me breathe a little clearer. 2 days after the restaurant, I started paying attention to small signals I had ignored before. I noticed how the habit of checking my phone at night had become a ritual of avoidance. I noticed how my father's tie smells like cheap cologne and how he leaves the living room light on until late as if waiting for someone who never comes. Those details are small, but in a life that suddenly feels like cracked glass, they are the only things I can examine without making myself dizzy. The first morning after the incident, my father put a note under my bedroom door. It was the sort of thing my dad would do when he wanted to make a peace offering without a scene. A folded napkin with 4 lines written in his blocky handwriting. He apologized, said he was sorry, and asked if we could talk, like men, later that day. I left the napkin on my pillow like a fossil and didn't respond. Silence felt safer than the risk of saying the wrong thing. That afternoon he knocked at my door. He didn't come in when I didn't answer. He stood there for a long time, and I could hear his shoes shifting on the hallway tile. Eventually he spoke through the door in a voice that wasn't his usual clipped tone. He said, "Carlos, I won't push you. I just want you to know I'm here when you're ready." There was an ache in his voice I had never heard. It sounded small and tired. I didn't speak to him for another day. Instead I walked the small streets near the campus, trying to use motion as an anesthetic. People moved around the world as if nothing had happened. That absurd normalcy made my chest hurt. My phone filled with messages from students, friends, and a few classmates who had heard the rumor and wanted to know, "Are you okay?" I avoided most of them. One of my friends, Mark, showed up at my apartment unannounced with coffee and an expression that was both sympathetic and tired. He didn't push, he sat, put the coffee down, and let me talk when I needed to. 3 days after the restaurant, my father left the house early and came back visibly shaken. He'd been to a therapist, he later told me, someone a friend recommended. He said that part of him needed to speak with someone who could untangle why he'd made the choices he did. He wasn't trying to use that as an excuse. He said the word therapy like a foreign object, measured and careful. For the first time I listened to him without planning my rebuttal. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded like he was preparing for an interview, and he started to speak in a way he rarely let himself, candid and slow. When he spoke about my mother, he sounded younger and older at once. He said that the first years after she died the world narrowed to routine, work, bills, maintenance, and that he hadn't known how to look for companionship without feeling like he was betraying her memory. That confession landed like something I had known but never let myself touch. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made it human in a way that anger alone hadn't managed. We argued. It was inevitable. I called him selfish and reckless. He called me naive and said I hadn't been there enough to understand the gaps. At one point he said, "We're both victims, Carlos," and I almost laughed because the phrase sounded absurd in the face of the betrayal. But later, when he described the quiet hours and how Andrea had smiled at him the way someone smiles when they find an attentive listener, I felt confused by the edges of the story. There was victimhood on both sides, not in the sense of absolution, but in the sense that loneliness had been a force shaping choices on every side. After the talk, he left a folder on the counter with bits of paper, a couple of printed messages, a hotel receipt, and a text thread screenshot that, when I looked at it, made the room tilt. It wasn't a neat dossier of guilt. It read like fragments of a relationship that had been cobbled together in private. The messages were flirtatious and clumsy. They alternated between the banal, "How was your flight?" and the intimate, "I think about you at night." Seeing that language between them felt like a physical sensation, like someone had taken away a door I thought closed and revealed a whole other room I never knew existed. That night Andrea sent me a string of texts that turned my stomach. She wrote apologetic paragraphs, circular and rehearsed. "I never meant to hurt you. I was confused. It wasn't planned." And the classic, "I love you," thrown in like a coin. The messages read like a woman trying on remorse the way you try on clothes that don't fit. Some lines were honest, others performative. Then there were the blank spots. The things she didn't say, like whether she had intended to continue seeing my father after meeting him, how many times they'd been together, or whether she had contact with him even when she was here with me. In those days I swung between furious bursts, slamming doors, throwing plates into the sink, and long stretches of numbness. I went to class, sat through lectures, and found my attention fracturing. The professors spoke in generalities about deadlines and submissions. My internal voice kept returning to the restaurant scene, my father's smile as he came in, Andrea's terrified look, the restaurant's low hum of unaware people eating. I felt exposed, like the private life of our family had been published on a public bulletin board. Word spread in ways I'd hoped it wouldn't. A gossip chain at the university picked it up. Someone saw Andrea on campus, someone else whispered they'd seen my father in town. I learned that the story had become a faint soundtrack behind daily life. People came up to me with that awkward mix of pity and curiosity people bring to public sorrow. "Hey man, are you okay?" One girl I barely knew sat down with me and said, "If you need to talk, I'm here." Her kindness caught me off guard. For a moment I wanted to tell her everything, and for a moment I also wanted to hide under the table. Despite the chaos, a strange thing happened between me and my father. The wall that had defined our relationship, politeness layered over distance, began, very slowly, to have cracks. He started making small, practical gestures I hadn't noticed before. He left a sandwich on my kitchen counter, he filled our water jug, he shuffled his schedule so he could be at home more. These acts were clumsy and insufficient, but they were consistent. He asked if he could come with me to a counseling session if I ever wanted that, and I didn't say no. The offer felt like a bridge thrown across a chasm, uncertain but genuine. Then Andrea reappeared in the most mundane way, an email. She wrote asking if we could meet because she wanted to apologize in person. There were lines that tried to be accountable. "I know I hurt you," she wrote. "I never wanted to choose between you two." Reading that made something twist in my chest. It wasn't rage in that message, it was something more like calculation. An attempt to center herself by asking for a private meeting that would allow her to show contrition on her terms. I handed the phone to my father without thinking. He read it, and for the first time in days, his face registered something like disgust aimed at himself. He said, "Don't answer. Let it sit." His voice was flat. That's when I realized something else. In the past, I had always been the one to withdraw from messy emotions. Now there was someone older and lonelier who might do the same if I pushed him away. That idea lodged itself in my gut like a burr. A week passed with almost no contact with Andrea. She sent a couple of brief voicemails that I didn't open. My friends offered advice that fell into two camps: sever all ties and never forgive, or take the high road and try to rebuild with time. Both camps sounded like formulas for a life I didn't want. I wanted to make a decision that felt honest to me, not one dictated by moral absolutism or by an ideal of stoic forgiveness. On day 10 after the restaurant, my father asked me to sit down with him again. He wanted to show me something, an old photo album he'd been keeping in the attic, he said. In it were pictures of our family, some of them faded at the edges. Images of my mother laughing into a camera, a younger version of him holding me with awkward pride. He told me a memory, the first time he took me to the river and I fell in the water because I couldn't swim yet. He recalled how he had felt when he carried me to shore: fear, tenderness, the raw responsibility of being two people at once. He said he had never wanted to fail me, not in any of the ways that mattered. That night we sat at the kitchen table in silence for a while. He finally said, "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't even expect it from you at all. I just want the chance to be honest and to fix the pieces that are mine." His insistence on the word "mine" felt important, an admission that he recognized his responsibility. I said nothing for a long time and then said, "I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I want to." He nodded as if he'd been preparing to hear those words for ages. Time is doing strange work. Some of the sharp edges are duller now, others are still raw. The rumor mill continues in the margins of my days. Andrea remains a closed chapter for now, but her presence is a low hum that returns unexpectedly, a text left unread, a memory of her laugh, the ghost of the restaurant light. I find myself dreaming in staccato images of confrontations that are yet to come. Two things are clear right now. One, I am no longer interested in simple answers. The black and white of "she is the villain" and "he is the monster" fails to capture the way loneliness and poor choices can tangle people into a harmful knot. Two, I have a decision to make about what family means to me. Do I choose a boundary that severs, or a boundary that attempts repair under strict terms? I haven't decided. I don't think I can choose yet. Then yesterday Andrea sent 3 words that made my stomach drop. "Can we talk?" I read them on the train, the city blurring past the window, and in that small sentence the whole thing spun back into motion. I realized I was about to make a choice that would define what family meant for me, and I wasn't sure which choice my future self would thank me for. The 3 words on my phone, "Can we talk?" felt like a match struck in a dry room. I ignored it for a long time because I wanted space to inventory what had been broken and what I could actually live with. When I finally answered, I wrote, "Not yet." That short sentence bought me time to think instead of react. Space became my priority. I went to the library more, scrolled my feed less, and started making practical decisions. What responsibilities I would keep at home, whether I could tolerate being in the same room as Andrea, and what conditions I needed if I was ever to speak with my father again. Boundaries used to be vague in my life. Now they were precise lines I drew to protect myself. A month after the restaurant, Andrea reached out through a mutual friend. I agreed to meet her in public, coffee, neutral ground, with 2 rules. She had to be honest, and I had the right to walk away at any time. She came in like someone who had been through a storm. The confident edges were gone. When she started to explain, the words were a mix of apology and confession. She said she had been lonely, flattered by attention, and that she had made awful choices. There was no neat excuse, there was only a plain, painful truth to sit with. Listening to her did not make the wound smaller. It did, however, turn the amorphous hurt into something I could point at. She asked for forgiveness, softly, like someone asking for a miracle. I couldn't give it then. Forgiveness, I realized, would have to be measured in actions over time, not in a few earnest sentences over coffee. So I left that meeting with the dignity of having listened, and with the clarity that I needed more than words. The conversation with my father was harder. We decided, reluctantly and with a lot of skepticism, to try family counseling. Not because I believed a therapist would magically fix things, but because I wanted a place where both of us could speak without the old patterns of politeness and retreat. In that room he cried, briefly and without performance, and said, "I am sorry for putting you here. I failed you as a father." Hearing him say that out loud was both a rupture and a relief. It did not erase what happened, but it opened a path to accountability. We set firm rules. He stopped contacting Andrea and removed the traces of their conversations. He committed to ongoing therapy and to regular check-ins with me about his progress. I told him that trust couldn't be rebuilt on words alone. It required consistent behavior and clear consequences if he slipped. He accepted those terms without bargaining. That commitment was the first concrete step toward repair. The social fallout shifted too. Some people who had been quick to judge stepped back when they saw the complexity of what had happened. Others, neighbors, classmates, a few professors, stayed and offered quiet, practical support. A bag of groceries, a text to check in, an offer to help with a move. Those small gestures were surprisingly powerful. They were stitches that slowly mended parts of the day-to-day life that betrayal had torn apart. I learned how to rebuild a community by doing ordinary things. Returning calls, accepting invitations I might have declined before, showing up even when I did not feel like it. I found a professor who became a mentor and a friend, someone who helped me focus on school and the larger plan for my life. I started working out more deliberately. Physical movement became a way to move my headspace as well. When I saw Andrea again, once, by accident, in a cafe line, there was no dramatic scene. I looked at her, felt the old knot of anger, and turned away. That restraint felt like progress. Punishing someone publicly would not have healed me. Choosing to protect my dignity did. Forgiveness did not arrive as a single decision. It felt more like weather, sunny intervals and storm fronts. There were days when I could sit at the same table as my father and talk about small things without the old shock. There were other days when grief and anger returned full force. We had brutal conversations where I told him things that hurt and he took responsibility. We also had quiet moments where he showed up. A call to check how I was, an effort to remember my schedule, him taking on chores to make my days easier. I am not presenting this as a neat redemption story. Childhood losses and adult mistakes do not fit into tidy arcs. What changed, and what matters now, is that I started building a life that is less reactive and more intentional. My father did not erase what he did, and Andrea did not become someone I could trust again. But my life moved forward in a way that felt like choosing myself instead of being trapped by the hurt. A year later, the wound is a scar. It does not dominate all my days. I graduated. My father and I have a cautious rhythm that we are still negotiating. Andrea is largely absent from my life now. Her presence is a memory that sometimes flashes across a quiet day. I still carry anger sometimes, but it sits with me differently now, less like a wildfire and more like a warning that tells me how to set better limits. If there is a lesson here, it is that boundaries and honesty are the scaffolding on which any attempt at repair must be built. It is okay to prioritize your mental health over the expectations others place on you. It is okay to hold anger and still allow space for someone's efforts to change if those efforts are real and consistent. Choosing who to protect and what to let go of is, in the end, a form of justice I can live with. I do not pretend everything is fixed. I do not want a tidy ending to a messy human story. But I am different from the person who sat in that restaurant watching the world tilt. I have learned to name what I need, to set limits, and to seek the kind of respect that does not ask me to sacrifice my well-being for the sake of appearances. That, for now, feels like the most honest victory. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Thanks for your attention.